Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. It's the varsity athlete Jeremy Bodette coming to you with a very, very special report outlining some incredible and disturbing claims that have been made against Vince McMahon. Before we get started, I wanted to mention a couple of things right from the get-go. First thing is, these are not my opinions. I am not passing judgment. I'm not claiming that any of the things that I'm about to review here are right or wrong, truth or false. That's not the purpose. The purpose of this is to take the 64 or 65 pages of the lawsuit that was filed in late January and read it, understand it, condense it down, and share it with you guys. So I don't want anybody to misinterpret this as any kind of endorsement or support of either side of this. I'm going to attempt to be as objective and non-biased as I possibly can in describing this to you, but the lawsuit itself is, of course, written in a biased way. So it's almost impossible to avoid. If my opinion is included, I'll be sure to share that very directly and transparently so that it's very easy for you guys to separate what's being claimed in the actual lawsuit versus what does the varsity athlete think about this particular thing. I think most of my opinion is going to be shared at the end of this video series. The second thing I want to mention is that this is an incredibly disturbing story. If true, if even only part of it is true, it's extraordinarily disturbing and extremely unique. The lawsuit shares testimony in very graphic detail, much of which is not included in the review that I'm going to be sharing with you in this series. But unfortunately, because of the nature of the claims, it is almost impossible to avoid a lot of what's going on. There are very detailed and disturbing descriptions of rape and other disturbing circumstances that just can't be avoided, unfortunately. So please have discretion, not just of yourself, but of those around you, and just make sure that the only people that are listening to this are people that should be listening to it. So without further ado, let's get started. This is the fall of Vince McMahon. Hey guys, welcome back to this very special report that we're doing for Wrestling with the Business. I am the varsity athlete Jeremy Bodette, coming to you live with the fall of Vince McMahon, Part 4, Escalation. Whew, boy. If you've been with us for this long, thank you very much. Get ready, buckle up. This is where things start to get really serious. Just to quickly review Part 3 with us. Part 3 was called Miss Grant Goes to Stanford, which covered early summer 2019. This was her first days at work. I talked a lot about the isolation that she was experiencing at the job, the fact that, again, the personal and the professional were kind of starting to bleed together. A couple people at work in positions of authority over her sort of were able to identify that something was going on between her and Vince, kind of sectioned her out. We talked about how she wasn't very busy given the amount of work that she had to do. Wasn't very much in comparison to everybody else, and it created this isolation factor. So now moving on, Escalation covers basically the meat, as it were, of summer 2019. Things start to get really out of hand now that Vince has established full financial and professional control over her destiny, conceivably. Now he begins to exert full control over her physically and sexually. Vince's presence begins to fully consume Grant. In the office, she feels watched. I talked last time in the last video about how WWE is Vince McMahon. They're one and the same. And she begins to feel completely watched outside the office, and she feels sexualized entirely as a result of her relationship with him. So there really is no way she lives under the purview. Vince is now big brother at work, always watching her. And outside of work, he's sort of physically exploiting her. The entirety of their communication has now been boiled down only to sexually charged exchanges and fantasy talk. She might text him on occasion to talk about this work topic or that work topic. And whenever she does, you get a very bland, yup, okay, sort of acknowledgement kind of a situation. But what does seem to be included are these long diatribes about fantasies that he feels, very, frankly, my personal opinion, very gross sexting going on, just descriptions of situations. Again, I'll make reference to several snapshots that are included in the lawsuit. I will not be reading them out loud here. Definitely not for public consumption, but if you want to, you can find them in the lawsuit. At this point as well, Vince stops referring to her as his, quote, friend, which is what he had been doing before. Now Vince begins pressuring her to take and send sexually explicit images of herself to him. So again, the escalation continues. Right now we've crossed that physical barrier. Now we're moving into more of a digital type situation. Again, but it's just between him and her, right? So this is almost like kind of a boyfriend-girlfriend situation that's been established. At least it's what he's trying to establish from his situation. Vince begins sort of some of this domineering language. He begins referring to her as his bitch and talks about fantasizing over her having sex with someone else. Presumably him having control over who she sleeps with is what provides him with pleasure, conceivably. At least this is what the lawsuit is saying. At the same time, there seems to be escalation in the nature of their communication. There's also a pretty sharp escalation in their sexual encounters as well, in intensity, in violence, in duration. She now begins sustaining injuries, including bleeding and pain related to the forceful use of sex toys. One of the more lurid examples or descriptions provided in the lawsuit outlines how Vince keeps a collection of sex toys, which he names after various professional wrestlers. We don't know which sex toys he keeps. There's not an inventory provided. We don't know which wrestlers he names them after, but there is this, he has a collection of sex toys and he names them after wrestlers, and he even aligns the color of the sex toy with the race of the wrestler. So you'll find a black sex toy will be named after an African American, and a white dildo will be named after a Caucasian wrestler in his promotion. And oftentimes he would pretend that other men, referencing specifically WWE superstars, so not strangers on the street, not guys he grew up with, not other people outside. These are superstars on TV, talent that he hires. He fantasizes about her having sex with them, or them being in the room while he is having sex with her. By the fall of 2019, so again, we see this escalation. By the fall of 2019, Vince's request for sexually explicit content from her escalates again to videos. So now we're not just taking photographs in compromising positions, we're taking entire videos. And at this time, the lawsuit indicates that she begins expressing apprehension again. And in response to that, Vince would often flaunt his power. One specific example that's given in the lawsuit is how he met with the Saudi crown prince in October of 2019, presumably related to one of the Saudi shows that they did. I think that was Crown Jewel. But you can see, again, his influence is growing. He begins to become an even more, he's fully dominated her in the professional and the financial aspect. Now he's fully dominating, and she's kind of beginning to get sucked into his fantasies. And these fantasies always seem to be specifically related to WWE superstars, whether it's the naming of the sex toys after specific superstars, fantasizing about the superstars having sex with her, or fantasizing about the superstars being in the room as he is having sex with her. There is sort of this very odd, sort of depraved mix of the professional and the personal for Vince. There's no line between the two of them. And there seems to be this fixation on the dominant or the domineering aspect of it. Vince has to control her. She is his bitch. He controls who she has sex with, when she has sex, how she has sex. And this idea of physically dominating over her is leading to what are reported to be injuries, specifically bleeding and pain, going forward. Part 5 is up next. Part 5 is called The Doctor is Sin. What we're going to see is that her injuries begin to escalate, and as a result of her injuries escalating, her complaints begin to escalate, and Vince begins to bring in an outside party, a doctor at a clinic, to try to manage the situation of the injuries and to get her the quote-unquote treatment that she needs. So we'll have to see what happens with that going forward. If you stayed with us this far, thank you very much. Hope that we're doing you a service. I can tell you that digging through the mud of this lawsuit was not a particularly pleasant experience, but again, one of the things we try to do in Wrestling with the Business is give everybody an idea of what the big picture is. If you don't read the whole lawsuit, if you don't understand what it is in the context of what's going on at the time, right now we're in the summer of 2019 at the company, putting it in the context of the people in this particular story, what is happening at the time of this particular story, how people are managing the different situations at this particular time with these characters in this story. We're trying to give a really good big picture of what's going on. This is definitely one of the biggest stories to break in the history of professional wrestling, and we want to provide you guys with the highest quality and easiest to consume detail associated with it. So please stay with us. I know this is tough, but I think it's not just important, not just interesting, but good to know. Like, it's good to see how this process is working. I think it's good to, if it's true, then sunlight's going to be the best disinfectant. I'll get to this later in our episodes, but we'll come to find out. We'll come to see how Vince responded, how the company has responded, how TKO has responded. And I think it'll lend some credibility to the way that, to some of the claims that are made in this. So thanks for sticking with us. Please keep watching so we can keep wrestling with the business.